Yes, welcome to the Biz Communication Show. I'm your host, Bill Lampton, every week bringing you a communication expert whose advice, tips, and strategies will help you boost your business. Today, we're very fortunate to have with us Deborah Boswell from the Birmingham, Alabama area. She identifies herself on LinkedIn this way. I am a certified and licensed speech language pathologist who serves as coach and consultant to clients in the corporate world who want to become more credible and powerful communicators. She's a communication coach, consultant, and speaker. She adds, I also speak to groups and associations about a variety of corporate communication issues. So Deborah's had 3 decades of working with hundreds of managers and executives. She's author of a new book, which we will talk about soon. And so it's my pleasure now to welcome Deborah Boswell. Hello, Deborah.
Hello, Bill. Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Terrific to have you share your expertise with us. One point that I'm sure many of our listeners would like some advice on, there's something that you offer called accent modification. Now, many of us might wonder about our accents, whether they're regional or whether they are international. So my question is, why would someone want to modify their accent? How would they do that? And what advantages would there be from that?
Absolutely. When we think about accents, we want to divide it up into, as you just said, regional and foreign. So let's take the foreign accent first, Bill. A foreign accent so you are a second language learner. You're speaking a second language in the country you're living in. It's not your native language. Most foreign accent clients come to me because they want to build confidence and credibility through more intelligible speech. Wherever you live, you want to speak and sound like the people that you live among. And so, of course, here in the United States, English is our language. And generally, individuals come to me. Sometimes it's to build self-confidence, but generally it's to build intelligibility so they can be successful in the workplace. Now, regional dialects, that's something very different. Generally, someone will want to address a regional dialect because they are not fitting in, because they are being judged with a bias based on their accent. And of course, a Southern accent, which is where I'm from, and I have a Southern accent. I have worked on it. I'm not ashamed of it, but I have refined it in the hopes that others will not assume that I'm ignorant. And if you think about it, when you watch movies, those with Southern accents are typically portrayed as slow and ignorant and backwoods, so to speak. But it could be an accent, you could be from the Bronx, you could be from Boston, and if you are not living among people who sound like you, it can hurt confidence, self-confidence. And I guess in some ways it could also be an issue with finding a job, finding employment.
I noticed that sometime back, and I think you still have it, you produced a DVD, Tame Your Wild Southern Accent.
Yes, it's now in audio, so it's uploadable or downloadable. Yes.
I did notice, I don't know if you've seen that on Amazon where that appears, but there were some comments, and one person commented, why would I want to change my accent? And why don't you have a course or a DVD on how to change and tame your Northern accent?
Right. I agree. And I even believe there was one comment that Deborah herself sounds Southern, and they missed the point totally. I can move into a really strong Southern accent at this moment. In code switching, I can do it, and there's nothing wrong with code switching. But I also know the long I should be right, light, not right, light, and eating and drinking, that kind of thing. So it's code switching, and someone would want to change that accent or that dialect because it's holding them back. I personally would not be the one to teach modification of a Northern accent. So, well, I guess I could. It's just flattening out some of those vowels. A lot of times it's the vowels, and it's that nasal tone. And we also have a nasal tone in Southern accents, just placed differently in terms of resonance. But people are offended many times when they find out I teach modification of a Southern dialect. They're offended by that. So they haven't experienced the setbacks from having a Southern accent, I think, if they're questioning why someone would want to do that. They've not experienced that bias firsthand.
I grew up in South Mississippi, where, of
Ah,
course, everyone around me had a pronounced Southern accent. I've
mhm.
lived in 9 different states, and I think that had a lot to do with taking care of my Southern accent. I can remember the first time I moved into the Midwest and I said, y'all, and somebody laughed at me. I thought, well, maybe I better not be saying y'all anymore. I,
Exactly. I travel a great deal, and a lot of my clients all over the country will use y'all. Now, I'm
mm-hmm,
hearing it more
mm-hmm.
outside of the South.
I've noticed, as of course you know very well, the
Mhm.
United States, we talked about international accents and regional accents. The United States is by no means one language. You mentioned the Boston area. I remember when I was working with a client there and they talked about they'd gone to park the car.
Right.
And then
Mhm.
going up very near Louisiana, Louisiana definitely has a language all its own.
Absolutely. It's beautiful with that French influence.
Yes, and they're also not just the language, but the idioms that exist in different parts of the country. When the first time I lived in the Midwest, in the South, we might say, "I don't go to movies anymore." In the Midwest, they say, "Anymore, I don't go to movies."
Huh.
it
Interesting.
it took a
Yeah.
while to get adjusted to that. But
Yes.
I agree with you fully that an accent makes an impression. And I would
Mhm.
assume that you would have this goal, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that when you work with someone for accent modification, your goal is that when they're talking with someone, the listener will concentrate on the person's content and not on any deviations in their delivery.
That's right. Content focusing on the message and not the delivery, and that the delivery wouldn't be a distraction. That's exactly right. The
I
message.
noticed that in addition to teaching presentation skills and in addition to helping people with speech pathology
Mhm.
issues, I noticed as well that you talk to business leaders about listening.
Yes.
Share that with us, please. What are some of the strategies and tips and guidelines that you give corporate leaders for becoming more effective listeners?
Yes, absolutely. For years, my favorite area to work in was presentation skills, and I still enjoy teaching people to be better communicators. But I will tell you what I've learned over about 15 years of researching listening is that the most important skill for a leader is the ability to listen. And I believe that the biggest challenge to being a good listener is focus. We live in the age of distraction, and I read somewhere that most of us have the attention span of a gnat. I believe that to be true, and I think technology has made it even more so. But the ability to focus on the person in front of you and taking time, if someone says, "Do you have a few minutes?" You need to make a decision at that moment. Do I? And if I do, and I say yes, then I'm fully committed. I'm on the hook, so to speak, for being a mindful, focused listener. But you do have the choice to say no, because sometimes it's not a good time. And when it's not a good time, you need to say no, not have a seat, and I'll keep typing. Please talk to me. We're so distracted. So being focused is so important. And then motivating yourself to truly want to listen. I've learned that the biggest way, the surest way to devalue another human being is to withdraw from listening. In essence, pretending they don't exist. If you stop listening, you stop the eye contact, you're not hearing what is being said. And the reverse is true. I do believe the greatest way to value another human being is to listen to them, mindful, true listening. And then the last is empathy. Empathy is so important. Trying to imagine what it feels like to be in that person's shoes, to reduce bias and judgment, because we don't know what it's like to be in someone else's shoes. I think there's some discussion around empathy versus compassion. My biggest concern is that I put myself in their shoes before I start to judge and try to learn more about what they're experiencing. And I do believe you can be a great speaker all day long, wonderful leader, good with people. But if you devalue your people with lack of engagement through listening, you will have a culture of employees that don't feel like they have value. It's a hard skill to learn.
It is difficult to learn. To me, the best chapter ever written on that was Stephen Covey's chapter, where he talks about seek first to understand and then to be understood.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that most of us, and I'm sure you teach this, most of us are not listening to comprehend. We're listening, just waiting our turn to talk.
Absolutely. The phrase that I use is listen to learn, not to respond. That's the motivation we should go into every conversation with. Once you've said yes and you're on the hook, listen to learn, because most of us listen to respond. And I even joke with my engineers that cocktail parties and networking receptions are no longer difficult if you listen to learn, not to respond. Most people are worried about, what do I say? I don't know what to say. You don't have to worry about what to say. If you truly invest yourself in listening to someone else, the conversation will flow naturally, because you will have questions, you'll ask for clarification, and you'll have a real lively conversation going before you know it.
I mentioned Stephen Covey, but long before him, Dale Carnegie was saying the same thing. There's a incident in Dale Carnegie's book that I often quote. Dale Carnegie said that he was invited early in his career, invited to a party where a very prominent lady said, you will meet some people here who can help you a lot in promoting your business. So he was excited about it. He went there. And all he did, he said, the entire evening was ask people about their business, ask them about their family, ask them about their hobbies, ask them about their vacations, their travel. And the next day, the lady called him and she said, Mr. Carnegie, this is overwhelming. Everyone that you talked to has called me and said what a great conversationalist you are.
That's the trick. That is the trick.
He had said nothing about himself.
Nothing.
And there's so many who make the mistake of thinking that if they learn presentation skills, if they learned how to command a meeting, if they learn how to pitch their product, but even in sales, certainly, that's been a big change in the last 30 years. You don't come in and say, here's what you need. Right. In sales, the key for a long time now has been, will you listen? Will you identify their needs? Will you hear their objections?
Yes, that's right. Will you ask those questions and then sit back and listen and learn? That's exactly right. I find it interesting, if you take the letters in the word listen and reconfigure those letters, those 5 letters, you get the word. Do you know what word you get?
What?
It's 6 letters. Silent. Is that not interesting? The exact letters that create listen are the same letters that are used for the word silent. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So I believe there's a message there.
There is. My wife and I have often talked about monologuers, people who only talk about themselves. And we say many of them think they're making a terrific impression because they are bragging about what they've done, or they're telling you all about themselves. They don't know that the opposite is happening. It's the listeners who really form bonds with people. I think that's so important as well. And one more point, that of course is exceedingly important in our interpersonal relationships. I remember I was teaching the communication seminar in my home state of Mississippi, working with attorneys that day. And one of them, when I had made some comments about listening, one of them raised his hand and said, Bill, I have been involved in more than 500 divorce cases. And in every one, without exception, one or more of the parties in the divorce case said, he or she does not listen to me.
I imagine that to be true. Yes.
Again, all right, let's talk about your book, Deborah. You have a new book out, and I'm sure it pulls together what you've been sharing with audiences and corporations and with individuals for 3 decades. Tell us about your book, please.
Thank you. I'll be glad to. This book is all about how to develop confident communication skills. It really looks at the nuts and bolts of communication, beginning first with grammar. That is such an important part of being a credible communicator. And I believe—
Ain't it so? Ain't it so?
It sure is. Absolutely. If you ain't paying attention to that, you're in trouble. But I do believe our universities and colleges, even the high schools, are not doing, for whatever reason, a good job in instilling grammar and written communication and verbal. And so I touch on grammar. I first open the book with a juxtaposition of what it is like to stutter. My passion clinically has been working with individuals who stutter. I no longer offer therapy type services any longer. I do run a stuttering support group for adults, and we've been meeting for almost 12 years, which is uncommon for a support group. But people who stutter never take their words for granted. They struggle just to get the mechanics to work together so that words would come out. And I think a lot of us in business, the business world, hold ourselves back by negative thinking. It's not that we have a mechanical problem with speaking or a neurological problem, but it's that we've let negative thoughts get into our head and hold us back. And so I cover some of the nuts and bolts in terms of grammar, vocabulary, being well-read, talk about being a good listener, spend a good bit of time in the book on executive presence, exactly what that is. There's a study by the Center for Talent Innovation, and they break executive presence down into 3 pillars: communication, appearance, and gravitas. And so we spend some time on that as well. And then I delve into foreign and regional and foreign accent as well, and talk a little bit about my experience coaching TEDx speakers in Birmingham and what I've learned from watching TED and coaching TED speakers locally. And so it covers the gamut of communication, everything from grammar to listening to presentation skills.
And the title of the book, Become a Confident Business Communicator.
Absolutely.
And how can we find that book? Is it on Amazon? There we go.
There we go. Yes.
I said, how do we find it? And you found it.
Mm-hmm. It's actually on my website, and we are working to get it on Amazon at this moment, but it's available through my website. You can pay through PayPal. So I hope individuals will be interested in the book.
Time for one more question.
Mm-hmm.
Many of us benefit from looking at people and listening to people who do things well. We like role models. We like people who show us how. As we think about top communicators, who would be 1 or 2 top communicators that you admire, respect, that you would recommend that we become familiar with, or maybe we already are?
Okay. My first thought is always Ronald Reagan, but he's in a league of his own, and we understand why he was such a good communicator. But lately, I've been paying a lot of attention to Nikki Haley, and being a female and understanding a great deal about female communication, some of the gender bias that exists when women speak. Even look at Hillary Clinton and what was said about her strident tone when she would become emotional. Nikki Haley has a very direct, assertive nature. She's confident, or she comes across as confident. She has a good, strong voice, and she doesn't step back from confrontation. I think she speaks with clarity. She is our ambassador to the UN and was previously the governor of South Carolina. And so I would encourage your listeners to take a look at the way she communicates. It's very clear, it's direct, good, strong speaking voice, right kind of pitch and resonance. I think she means business when she speaks without coming across as aggressive. So I chose a female. I think that's a good person to check.
Thank you for that. I would imagine we can find her on YouTube. Almost anybody in the public eye is on YouTube. So I bet there's some good examples of Nikki Haley on YouTube.
I would imagine so, yes.
Deborah, this has been so informative. It's been enjoyable. And I simply want to mention that definitely we have to do this again sometime.
Okay, I would love to. It's been a delightful
experience.
I love to talk about communication.
Yeah, you have a reservoir of great information that will help us in our business, and that's what the Biz Communication Show is all about. Share with us now, please, your contact information. You mentioned your website a minute ago. What's that?
The website is www.deborahboswell.com. So it's my first and last name, deborahboswell.com.
And then you have a very good LinkedIn presence as well, I noticed.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I certainly encourage all our viewers and our podcast listeners to check into her website, purchase her book, get to know this person who has helped hundreds of executives, corporate leaders, has brought excellent presentation skills to audiences, and she's a very receptive person. So I do encourage you to get in touch with her. And since Deborah has given her contact information, I'm happy to give mine. Biz Communication Guy. So logically, the website is biz, B-I-Z, bizcommunicationguy.com. Encourage you to go there, learn about my services for corporations and individuals. Contact me and let's talk about how my services can benefit you. Deborah, any closing remarks for our conversation?
Well, I would like to say thank you, Bill, for this opportunity. It's been delightful, and I would encourage everyone to communicate with confidence. Thank you.
And we thank all those who have been with us today as well. Look forward to having you with us next week when I host another business communication expert. Thank you and have a great day.